Everyone, and welcome to my channel Chess with Arsalan. In this series of videos, we are going to talk and analyze a couple of games, maybe more than a couple of games, between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov between 1990 and 1999. So, in the start of 1990, they played a World Chess Championship match against each other, and this was basically their last match against each other. And um, very interesting games have been played in that match. So I'm going to start with the first. I'm going to start the first game uh, from their match in 1990 in New York. So Kasparov had the white pieces and Anatoly Karpov with black. And this was the second game that played. Kasparov started with e4, and here Karpov replied with e5. So he's basically giving up his Caro-Kann that he was playing previously in the years before. For example, they played a couple of Caro-Kann games, namely the one in Amsterdam. So here is Karpov giving up that Caro-Kann and he's playing normal Roy Lopez. So knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and here Kasparov writes that he was even prepared to face the Berlin defense. He was expecting Karpov to play something new, but he will stick with his previous variation. So he played knight Rui Lopez, and after a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle kingside, bishop e7, rook to e1, b5, bishop b3, d6, c3, castle kingside, all normal, h3, and now bishop b7, Zaitsev variation. Um, Previously in his previous matches, he employed knight d7. This was something that he had played previously. For example, one of their game went d4 and bishop f6. But here after h3, bishop b7 was played, and Kasparov played d4, rook to e8, knight b d2, bishop f8, adding extra protection to the e5 and getting ready to play e takes d4 and applying pressure on the e4 square. So here Kasparov played his favorite plan. He played a4, trying to attack the b5 and creating a weakness there. H6, bishop c2, adding protection on the e4 square, of course. And here Karpov played e takes d4 here in this position. This is a normal variation, but there's another passive variation that they played. Excuse me. They played in their 1985 match in the ninth game. In that game, Karpov played knight to b8, something like barrier, and after bishop d3, he played c6, and um, this was tested in that game. We are going to catch that game soon, but because it's not our discussion today, I'm going to escape that game. So e takes d5, e takes d4 by Anatoly Karpov. He played c takes d4, and after knight b4, bishop b1, b takes a4 was played. The normal variation here is to play c5. And for example, after that, white can play d5, and it's a complicated variation that actually appeared later on in the match. But here, Karpov played b takes e4. Kasparov played rook takes a4, and Karpov added protection to the knight and b4 by playing a5, and here rook a3. Very interesting game, a very interesting move. So this was first played by Sachs, and after that, Kasparov employed this idea against Bliavsky. And the idea is that Kasparov is trying to bring his rook to e3 or g3 along the third rank. That's the idea. Of course, if he wants to bring it to the g3, the knight on f3 has to move first. But this is the general idea behind this move. So Karpov did something similar. He played rook a6, and he's also trying to bring his rook to the king side via the fixed rank. Now, In variations with uh, um, in some variations, for example, c5 is going to be played or d5 has to be played as a plan. So in those variations that the center is going to open very soon, this kind of move, rook to a6, is going to be very useful. Why? Because the rook is readily uh, um, joining the defense. So after rook a6, Kasparov played knight h2. Obviously, one of the normal plans in this position is to play knight g4 or f3 and knight g4, and after exchange on d4, g4, h takes g4, and opening up the h file for the attack. So this is the general idea. That's why the knight is coming here. But another idea is to play rook to g3 or f3. So bringing the rook to the king side and mm, get ready for the attack. So here Karpov played g6. Uh, this is a normal response in this kind of position, and it happened in previous games. But let me show you. For example, Karpov played g3 in previous moves. So for example, um knight g4 was played as a response in his game against Hjartson in the Seattle match in 1989, and the game went like knight takes g4, queen takes g4, c5, d takes c5, d takes c5, e5, obviously opening up the diagonal of the bishop, and after queen d4, queen to g3, and rook e6 with equal game. So this was what he played against Hjartson. Or another variation after g6 is to play f4. This was the game between Vasily Ivanchuk and Nataly Karpov in Linares 1989. So the game went like d5, e5, knight e4, knight g4, c5. Very good move, trying to destroy uh, the center of the white. Knight takes e4, d takes c4, and after d takes c5, bishop takes c5, bishop e3, bishop f8. So it's a normal game. So uh, g6 was previously employed by Karpov, so he decided to repeat this variation in his game against Kasparov. And here it comes one of the key moments in the game. Here Kasparov played f3, and this move was initially suggested by Timoshenko. So basically, White is trying to strengthen the center by playing f3, and after this move, uh, rook on e8, knight on f6, and bishop on b7, they are actually biting on granite. They don't have enough play. They are restricted by the pawn structure of white, and especially the e4 pawn, because e4 pawn is no longer a target in the position, and it is restricting black's play. The d5 is being controlled, f5 is being controlled. Black cannot put a piece there. It cannot be attacked very easily because, for example, for attacking, this knight has to be removed for playing f5. So this is a very good move. It paralyzes three pieces at once. And here Karpov panicked. He played queen d7. And the idea is to bring the queen on the b5 square. But so by playing queen to b5, uh, Karpov will be adding extra protection to the a5 pawn. But here, the better move was to play c5. And after, for example, d5, cutting off the rook on a6, the rook can no longer join the king side. White, for example, can play queen e7 with the threat of bishop takes d5, and note that this rook on e1 is hanging. And for example, white can play rook f1, and it leads to a complicated game. For example, bishop g7, knight c4, and knight h5, exploiting the fact that the g3 is very weak now. Knight g4, knight g3, take on h6, king h7, knight g4, knight takes f1, queen takes f1, rook a8, and f4. So it will be a very complicated game. But in the game, Karpov panicked and played queen d7. So the response was knight c4, and Karpov put his queen on d5. Now, Karpov is defending his weakness on a5, but another weakness appears on the position, and it's the pawn on c7. It's now weak. It has not much protection in the position, and Kasparov took advantage of this weakness almost immediately. He played rook to c3. Now it's very difficult for black to carry out the plan of d5, uh, because after that black will lose a tempo after knight a3, and then white will play e5. That's why d5 is not easily operatable at this moment. So Karpov played bishop c8, and basically Karpov is now in the defensive mode. Uh, um, Here there was another option for Karpov, and it was to compromise and put the queen back on d7. So this was an option. And for example, white could have played bishop f4, and after d5, executing the d6 d5 plan, knight d5, attacking the queen on d7 here, and queen d8, and for example, knight eg4 with an attack on h6 and on c7. Um, it was This position is still slightly better for white, but it was way better than what Karpov had chosen uh, in the game. So in the game, after rook to c3, Karpov played bishop c8, and after bishop e3, he made yet another mistake. He played king to h7. Um, uh, this is a defense against that threat that I have mentioned earlier. Uh, Knight a3 and queen c1, because after knight a3 and queen c1, white will be attacking h6 and c7 at the same time. So he's trying to defend one of the weaknesses first and the second one in the next turn. But it's a mistake. It's a suspicious move, and it took Karpov significant amount of time to make this move. By the way, so Kasparov played queen c1, again introducing the threat of knight a3, and that's why Karpov played c6, which was the third mistake of Karpov in this move, in this game. So basically, c6 is weakening the d6 pawn, and it's a very sensitive square in the position. You will see that why, but there were some alternatives that should be analyzed in this position. For example, we said that the c7 square is weak. So how about pushing that pawn and exchanging it on c5? For example, c5 here in this directly c5. So d takes c5, d takes c5, and after knight g4, now white is attacking h6 square with 1, 2, 3 pieces. The c5 is still under attack. So this would be a better position for white, and black will be eventually have to take on g4, and after take on g4, the h file will be open. So c5 is not going to work very well. How about defending the c7 pawn by playing queen b8? And here again, white can play knight g4, and after taking on g4, h takes g4, bishop to g7, queen to d2, and white can follow with king f2 and rook h1 with a decisive attack on the h file. So what else is left? Rook to c6, again defending the c7 square. Now here white can play knight a3, the previous plan, and after queen d7 d5. And this c7 pawn will be weak permanently for the rest of the game. And white will have a winning position. But all these variations that I have analyzed are slightly better than what Karpov has chosen in the main game. He played c6 and made a permanent weakness on d6. So Kasparov played knight g4, typical Spanish maneuver, and Karpov made another suspicious move, um, knight to g8, adding protection to the h6 square. Here he could have exchange, and after exchange on g4, exchange on g4, again the previous plan with king f2 and rook h1 is doable, but Karpov played knight to g8, and it was at this moment that Kasparov uh, made the audience surprised by his move. He played bishop takes h6, and this move is directed to the weakness that Karpov has made in the position by his own hand. So let's see what happens. This is a piece sacrifice, obviously. Bishop takes a6, bishop takes h6, knight takes, and now knight takes d6. And now, as you can see, the knight is attacking e8, f7, the queen, it's attacking the c8 as well. So it's a dominating knight in the position. So knight takes d6, queen b6, knight takes e8, and here Karpov played queen takes d4 check. But let's see what happens if Karpov tries to capture this knight by playing queen to d8. So in this position, if black plays queen d8, white can play d5, and after queen takes e8, d6, and this d6 pawn is a very dangerous passed pawn, and um, it's well protected by the heavy pieces of white. So that's why Karpov played queen takes d4, and after king h1, uh, queen to d8, and here Karpov played rook to d8. And as you can see, the heavy pieces of white are very strong. So here Karpov played queen takes e8, and Kasparov played queen to g5. Now moving in the second phase of the attack, invasion. Uh, Here in response, Karpov played rook a7, but let's analyze a couple of variations first. What happens in knight g8? Um, if black plays knight g8, queen h4 check, king g7, rook to d8, and this was the invasion that I was talking about. Queen to e6 and f4, and white wins in this position. There are one, two, three, and potentially four pieces attacking on the king side. The king is well exposed. The position will collapse very soon. What about queen e6? Basically, by playing queen e6, black is trying to exchange the queens. Black is trying to give an offer of exchange of the queens. So here white can play again rook to d8, and after, for example, f6, queen f4, knight f7, attacking the rook on d8, queen to c7, pinning the knight, rook a8, bishop d3, knight takes, and rook c to d3, and the second rook will join the attack, and white will win. So in all these two variations, as you can see, the invasion of the rook from d1 to d8 was something that very decisive. So let's see what happens if black tries to block this invasion by playing bishop d7. Here, white can play rook to c5, and this bishop is basically useless, and this rook is out of the game. It cannot join the defense. This knight is misplaced. It should be in the king side defending the king, but it's in the queen side doing nothing. So bishop d7 is also not a very good move. So basically, all the alternatives for black are not good. Are not good. So after queen g5, Karpov played rook a7, and here rook to d8 was played eventually, and queen e6, and f4. And here Karpov played bishop a6. Now, if black tries to exchange the invading rook by playing rook to d7, what happens then? Here white can play f5, and when the queen moves, the rook can be taken, excuse me, the bishop can be taken. So this one is not going to work. If black plays f6, cutting the connection between queen and rook, then queen c5, attacking the rook, rook to d7, queen takes a5, attacking the before knight and protecting the rook on d8, rook to d8, queen takes d8, king g7, e5, opening up the line of the bishop, f5, queen to d4, knight d5, and then bishop a2, pinning the knight and winning. So the two alternatives, rook to d7 and f6, are not good enough. So Karpov played bishop a6, and here Kasparov played f5. Obviously, he should not be greedy by playing queen takes a5. This is not going to work, because in that case, black can play queen e7, and uh, the position will be equal. So don't he should not be greedy at this moment for one pawn. Uh, he should not destroy his position. So here he played bishop a6, f5 was played, queen e7, queen d2, and queen e5. Black is trying to keep the queen on the center. Queen f2, and this one is very interesting move. White is trying to prepare rook to c5, but there was one alternative to this move, and it was rook to g3, sacrificing a whole rook. And after, if for example black accepts the sacrifice by playing queen takes g3, rook to h8 check, and here if king takes h8, white can play check, and after, let me see, king to g8, the f6 will be decisive, and if black plays king to g7, then taking here, king f6, rook to e8, cutting off uh, the king from e5, knight d3, bishop takes, f takes, and the attack is irresistible. White is winning basically. So this rook to g3 was probably a funnier way to win. More White could have more fun by playing this move, but Kasparov played queen f2, queen to e7, queen to e4, to d4, introducing the checkmate with rook h8, knight g8, cutting off the rook connection, and after e5, uh, this is basically over. The black's position is collapsing. Knight e5, take on g6 check, takes on d6, rook to c6. Now g6 is very weak. Um, Queen takes d8, queen takes a7, knight d e7, taking on a6, queen d1, queen g1, queen d2, and king f1. And at this moment, Karpov resigned. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please share, like, comment, and subscribe, and wait for my next video. Until the next time.